Hello, welcome to The Morning Show with me, Martin King.
And me, Claire Brock.
Now, coming up on today's show, a Scientologist for 20 years, Pete Griffiths now describes the Church of Scientology as a cult. Having lost over £20,000 to the group, his biggest regret is that he encouraged others to join.
I'm spending most of my time now trying to redress the wrongs that I consider I did back in the day, which will be getting people into Scientology. I'd consider that a great wrong that needs redressing, definitely.
We'll be speaking to former Scientologist Pete Griffiths shortly.
Also, he vanished without trace in 1933, and the subsequent inquest was the first in the state to be held without a body. We'll be looking at the mystery surrounding the disappearance of American professor Arthur Kingsley Porter.
I've been on a couple of horses in my time, but never, ever on an animal like this. This is a king meeting kicking king. This horse has won over €1 million in prize money. But what's he doing now? Find out later.
And he lost 8 stone in 7 months. Limerick man Tom O'Neill will be telling us about how he never gave up his weight loss goal, even after the loss of his best friend, his dad.
But first today, for 20 years, Pete Griffiths was a Scientologist. Then in 2008, after spending over £20,000 sterling, he left.
Today he describes the Church of Scientology as a cult and says his biggest regret is that he encouraged others to join.
I got people into Scientology. I mean, that was my job. My job was to get people into Scientology, to make them interested in Scientology, to find out what it was in their life that they felt was holding them back. They call it ruin finding, you know, what's ruining your life. And sometimes you just ask the direct question. In some cases, it'd be quite obvious. You know, you could look at someone and know what was ruining their life, you know, and in others, it would take a bit of digging. My brother to this day does not have normal communications with me. We did speak very briefly at my father's funeral recently, but it was only because we both kind of agreed, without even saying, not to mention Scientology as a subject, and that's how we got through that. Really, I've only lost a brother. There are other families that have been seriously torn apart. As a religion, so-called religion that's supposed to pull people together, it just does the opposite. It splits apart families, and it's just dreadful.
And Pete joins us in studio now. Pete, thanks for coming along today.
You're welcome.
You mentioned your brother there at the start, and he's still a committed Scientologist. And it was actually your brother who introduced you to a book that sparked your interest in Scientology. Tell us about that.
That's right. He met me actually in a lunch break from work, and he was being strangely secretive, and it's only when I look back now that it seems odd. But he eventually, after talking for about maybe half an hour about this book, he kind of showed it to me, and I just said, yeah, I'll read that. You know, I was, you know, pretty blasé about the thing, and I took the book home and I read it, you know, so.
Did it interest you?
Not particularly. Some parts of it seemed interesting, others were a bit kind of confusing. I don't think it's, you know, a very well written book, to be honest. What I found out since as well, that a lot of the stuff that's in that book is actually taken from other sources. They talk about the greatest good for the greatest number, and that's actually something called utilitarianism, which was started by a Baptist minister in Yorkshire in the 1800s. And there are other factors that have been taken in. I also believe that I know nothing about Count Alfred Kubinski, but I believe a lot of that book is actually based on his work as well. So it's kind of like a plagiarized, kind of mishmash, self-help thing.
While you were reading this, your wife developed an interest in what you were reading.
Absolutely, yeah, and we couldn't both read the same book. She sent away to the local organisation for a copy, her own copy, and because, like, what happened then, of course, like, because she bought the book from them, they had her name, phone number, address, and she got a phone call to go over there to do the free personality test, just like the one they're doing on Abbey Street right now. And that's how we started to get further and further sucked in, you know.
Yeah, and tell us about this personality test, because off the back of it, they create a graph, don't they? And that's what they use as a tool, I suppose, for introducing you to Scientology.
It's called the Oxford Capacity Analysis, and it's got nothing to do with Oxford at all.
Okay.
It is quite simply a sales tool. The only reason for this thing is that they can put the graph in front of someone and say, you are depressed. and then the person's, no, I'm not depressed, and then, well, this is what you've told us about yourself, you're depressed. And if a person like argues the point too much, you move on to the next one. So you know, you're not there to upset people, you're there to draw them in. And that's what they use it for. There are 10 traits on this graph, and it is simply a sales tool. It's not a personality.
You were asked to fill this in simply because you went to collect your wife.
That's right, yeah.
And they invited you in to do this.
They did indeed, yeah. And I was happy to do it because, I mean, I'll be honest, I've always enjoyed filling in little tests like this in magazines. You know, it's fun, you know. How assertive are you? Well, let's find out, you know. So to me, it was just another one of those, only it wasn't, you know.
OK. Well, it is worth saying at this point that we did ask the Church of Scientology, a representative, to come on the show today. Now, they turned down that offer. They did issue us with a statement, and they have said, you say it's a cult, they say it's not, it's a religion, and that's something they maintain on that. But you got involved with it, and
yes,
you decided to join. Tell us a little bit about that journey and where it brought you.
Well, I will. Interestingly enough, it's not called Scientology when you first get involved through the personality test route. They call it Dianetics. Now, the first book on the subject was called Dianetics, and what they tend to do is slowly introduce Scientology to you. So if you were put off by the word Scientology or the word cult, it doesn't even come into it because it's not Scientology. This is Dianetics. This is a self-help procedure.
OK.
So
and does it empower you?
Does it empower?
Empower you?
It can make you feel good, definitely, but I think a stage hypnotist could also make you feel good, and I think what they're actually doing is a form of hypnosis.
Right. OK. Well, you were there, you went through this.
I was there and I went through it, yeah.
Did they hypnotise you?
I'm not too sure what hypnosis actually is, but I feel that I was definitely put in a strange mental place, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. As time goes on and they introduce Scientology, it then takes on a whole, you know, it takes on legs of its own, and you buy more and more courses, and strangely enough, from the introductory book that's only a few euro, each subsequent course costs more and more and more.
OK, now you're from a Catholic background.
Sure.
Yourself and your brother got involved in this.
Yes.
And your wife too.
Yeah.
How did the other members of your family react to this? How did your parents react to it?
For the last 24 years, they have absolutely hated the fact that my brother's in it, or, you know, his involvement, and they hated my involvement. They were worried for myself, my wife, and our children when we were involved, because they didn't know what was going to happen there. Fortunately, none of my children have actually become Scientologists or shown any interest.
OK, but for almost 20 years you were involved. Did you try to get them involved? I
did. When I was running the mission, I tried to get them to do the children's communication course and other things.
So there's a separate course for kids?
Oh, yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Pete, you've talked about the money that you spent, and it led to such a lifestyle change that at one point you say your family were starving and you'd sold your home. Tell us about that. That was 3 years after you joined Scientology.
Yeah, well, during the 3 years, we had no money. Scientologists have this policy called exchange, and really a fair exchange would be, you know, whatever, I pay so much for a cup of coffee, I get a cup of coffee. Then they talk about exchange in abundance, where I want a cup of coffee and I get a cup of coffee in a nicer mug. And then they have like out exchange, which is also known as rip-off. Now, they consider that anybody who's taking part in the welfare system is ripping off the government or the people. The strange thing is that a lot of people in Scientology organisations are on welfare because you will not get by on your Scientology wages.
Tell us about your own financial situation, because it actually led you to leave the church.
Totally, absolutely. I had to claim welfare to live. That's what we did. We sold the house and we used those proceeds to get by. But in the 3 years that I was there, contrary to getting the £200 sterling a week that I've been promised, I got nothing, hardly. I think some weeks we get nothing, and that would go on for weeks and weeks. £8. The most we ever got, I think, was 30, and in that week they'd found some sucker to pay in a big amount of money, and that's why we all got that. The money trickles down to the staff members, and you could be working over 100 hours a week.
You weren't able to feed yourself, your wife, your child?
No, not at all. We were actually starving. We had one child. We were actually paying a babysitter out of our welfare money so that we could go into the organisation and work for nothing. Something had to change.
Was it at that point that you set up your own mission?
Well, no, we left first, and like a lot of independent Scientologists today, I still believed in the workability of Scientology. I still thought it had some value, and I still wanted to do something to promote Scientology in the world, just not the particular people that I'd been involved in. So I contacted the Mission Network, and they allowed me to open up my own mission, which I ran for the next 4 years, quite successfully at the very beginning. And then because of the pressures of production, because you're not allowed to have a down statistic in Scientology, they measure everything. And book sales would be a good example. If you sold 2 books one week, the next week you've got to sell 3, the next week 4, and it's a continual uptrending thing. You can't go down. And I did go down for 6 weeks, and that's when they threw me out.
So they threw you out, and you made that decision then to move with your family to Mayo. And for many years then, while you weren't an active Scientologist, if you like, you were still within the church setup. All that changed for you, though, in 2008. What was the moment that you'd said, no, this is strange, or I don't want to be involved with this anymore?
There was a moment, but it took a while for that moment to actually materialise. At first, I became aware there was a protest going to take place in Abbey Street, and these were the people that you may have seen wearing the masks and that. And I thought, what's going on? And I got to speak to one, and they told me that they were protesting Scientology because of all these abuses, and they rattled off all these abuses. And I'm thinking, that's not true. Because this is what I've been told, that people who criticise Scientology tell lies. And I was just told in no uncertain terms, oh, just look online. And that's what I started to do. And it took about 3 months of nightly looking online. It became quite a habit for me. Now, what can we find out about now? And I looked at every single aspect of Scientology and Dianetics and L. Ron Hubbard. I looked over everything I'd ever been told about all the things I thought were workable, even things I thought weren't workable. And when you analyse them, having been away from it all for so long, you do get a different viewpoint. And I'd say after about 3 months, it kind of went, you know, there was a penny dropping. Yeah. Oh my God, it's a con. And that's not a nice feeling. You just like, you know.
And that peak was in 2008, but as we know, the internet's been around for years. Not only that, but these claims about Scientology have been around for years. Did you not at any point over those years think, you know, I don't know about this, I should look more into this?
I hear what you're saying, Claire.
Why are they saying
I hear what you're saying, but I did not hear that stuff. When I was actually in, if there was going to be a programme critical of Scientology on TV, we were actually told not to watch it. If there were any books came out critical, we were told not to read them. And we went along and didn't watch the TV, and we didn't read the stuff. I remember quite well the Time magazine article where they called them the thriving cult of greed and power, and there were court cases on that over the years. That's still an epic moment, you know.
Well, you're now with the protesters.
Yes, I am, yeah.
They claim, well, the Church of Scientology claim that you are intimidating their members as they try to go to church.
I can't agree with that. Just to give you one example, I was walking past one day and I noticed there were 6 Scientologists trying to get people in for the free personality test or the stress test. I'm not sure which one it was. 4 of them were male and 2 were female. And I stood opposite, just watching them. And I saw one pick up, you know, phone, and the next minute a female guard came along, and they spent 20 minutes talking to the female guard. And when she came across to me, she said, you know, you're quite within your rights to protest. I said, thank you. And then she told me that they'd been saying that they felt intimidated by my presence opposite as they were trying to do this thing. I don't see how one person can intimidate 4 men and 2 women. I'd actually gone up and spoken to them before that, and they were just laughing and joking with me. So the whole thing for the guard was basically just an act. You know?
You have a conference coming up later this month.
We do indeed. We have a conference on June the 30th in the Teachers Club, Parnell Square West.
And it's been attended by the great-grandson
of indeed.
The Church of Scientology leader, L. Ron Hubbard.
That's right. His name's Jamie DeWolf. His parents changed the name because they were getting so much hassle from the Church of Scientology. And he goes under the name of DeWolf. And, yeah, he's L. Ron Hubbard's great-grandson.
OK, well, thanks for coming in and giving us an insight
You're welcome.
Into that world. And as the lecture is taking place at the end of this month.
Yeah,
thanks for joining us today. Now, after the break, vanished without trace by the mystery of what happened to American professor and Glenveigh Castle owner Arthur Kingsley Porter.